I want you to imagine for a second that it's July 27th, 2021. Still a little dark outside because it's pretty early in the morning here in the States, but you're hardcore. You want to watch the team gymnastics event at the Tokyo Olympics live. They're airing it again in like 12 hours, but waiting until the nighttime broadcast is for the week. There's no way you're just gonna not look at the internet until then, right? Right. So you walk down the stairs, flip the light switch on, get your cup of coffee all ready to go, because again, it's like not even 7 o'clock yet, and you turn on the TV. And what you see over the next couple of hours shocks you. Team USA went into those Olympics as the heavy favorites to win the gold medal. It seemed like a pretty safe bet that if all went according to plan, the US team of Simone Biles, Jordan Childs, Sunisa Lee, and Grace McCallum would be able to bring home the gold relatively comfortably. That perception may also have been encouraged by the fact that COVID-19 had pretty much prevented any international competition from happening for over a year, so we didn't really know what they were up against. But even then, we had a cheat code leading our team. Everything we've been hearing leading up to these games, NBC's marketing, the Olympic trials, Simone interviews on daytime television, everything was telling us that if everybody else just kept it in the fairway, Simone could carry the team to its third straight gold medal. But what happens if that cheat code stops working for some reason? Nobody had really even considered that as a possibility up to that point, but early that morning in late July, it moved way past being just a possibility. It was reality. The US started the competition on the vault, which historically is an event that Simone has absolutely dominated. But in Tokyo, something was just off. Her qualifying round had not gone great, including on the vault, but hey, she still made it in, right? Simone went third and was supposed to do a vault called an aminar, which is 2.5 twists in the air, but then she just kind of didn't. Now, to an untrained eye like mine, it can be kind of hard to tell the difference between a good vault and a bad vault. But pretty much as soon as Simone landed, the announcers on NBC let us know which one it was. Tim Daggett has been at or been in every Olympics for the past 30 years, and my guy was straight up shook. All he could say was wow, and both at home and in Tokyo, everyone was trying to figure out what the heck just happened. And just as a reminder, we're 20 minutes into the broadcast at this point. That pot of coffee you brewed a little while ago is probably still warm, but there's still so much left to happen at this event. After talking to her coaches for a minute, Simone heads off to the locker room. But she had her grips on for uneven bars, so it seems like she's coming back. She has to, right? She's Simone Biles. But a few minutes go by, and the other girls are warming up for bars, but there's still no Simone. We don't know what's going on. Tim Daggett doesn't know what's going on. It's chaos. Finally, right as the next rotation is about to start, Simone emerges, makes a beeline for her teammates. They have a pretty quick conversation, and even though everybody has masks on and it's hard to tell what was actually said, we get the news from the broadcast a few moments after it ends. And unless you're Russian, it's not good. Simone Biles is, in fact, not coming back to compete. The three rookies are going to have to do the rest of this on their own, because the GOAT is sitting the rest of this one out. This is the point in the story where the internet basically just breaks. There's still a competition going on, but that seems to get swallowed up somewhat by the fact that Simone Biles is no longer a part of it. It certainly doesn't help that in her absence, the Russian Olympic Committee are pulling away from us on the leaderboard, because that is absolutely happening. The three gymnasts that remain, Grace McCallum, Suni Lee, and Jordan Childs, have to ball out to keep it close and get a silver, which, to their credit, they absolutely did. But as well as those three performed, especially considering the circumstances, it's not nearly enough to take the attention off of the one who couldn't make it to the end. It's a team sport, and everybody gets a medal, but all anyone seems to want to talk about is Simone Biles. The natural reaction to something like this is to ask, why did it happen? Right? Why did the greatest gymnast in the history of the sport, without any apparent injury, leave arguably the biggest meet of her entire life? USA Gymnastics came out later and said that Simone had been withdrawn for mental health reasons, but this is a world-class athlete who's known for her self-confidence. Why was this the thing she couldn't overcome? Trying to answer that question, in good faith or otherwise, became one of the biggest talking points of the days and weeks after those Olympics. But even a year later, understanding what caused Simone Biles to scratch is not easy. In the words of the great American philosopher Benjamin Haggerty, otherwise known as Macklemore, there's layers to this shit, playa. We're going to start small and then get bigger, because this story covers 40 years of US gymnastics history and touches on a cornucopia of topics. But at the center of it all is Simone. That's where things start to fall apart a bit. On the most granular of levels, What caused Simone to get pulled out of the team final in Tokyo is a condition called the twisties, which is basically the gymnastics version of the yips. We've got an entire video on that topic specifically up on the channel, which I'll link in the description. But the twisties are probably the first thing you'll hear from people trying to explain what happened, other than Simone being a selfish sociopath, but we'll get to that in a minute. Very basically, the twisties are a motor coordination and planning issue where a gymnast loses their ability, hopefully temporarily, to figure out where they are in the air. Normally, they really don't even have to think about it. They've spent hundreds of hours practicing and can just rely on their muscle memory to perform whatever skill they might be going for. But when they're in the air, gymnasts are both the pilot and the plane. And if there's a disconnect between those two things, that's a problem. But unfortunately, knowing what happened is kind of the easy part. Figuring out why it happened is much harder. But there's a lot of information from the time before the team final and the time since that can help us out. First, let's look at Simone's performance leading up to these games. To qualify for the Olympics, athletes have to compete at Olympic trials, which Simone did like everyone else on the team. But she was far from her best at that event. I mean, I say that knowing that she literally finished first by over 2 points, but still, not spectacular by Simone's standards, including a rear fall off the balance beam. It feels like I'm being kind of critical here, so I just want to remind you that she straight up won this competition despite all of that. But still, it was kind of a shock to anyone who's followed her career up to this point, possibly including her.
I was really happy, but I was just sad because everybody came out here to watch us and I didn't give them my best performance, but at the end of the day, it is what it is.
It is what it is. We watched you on the floor, okay? Did you see what happened after your floor routine?
Yeah, they gave me a standing ovation. That was pretty crazy.
That clip kind of represents Simone's whole frame of mind going into these games in Tokyo, at least as far as physical stuff is concerned. I'm not at my best, but I'm probably still better than everyone else, and that seems like it's good enough. So it wasn't as much of a concern when she messed up in a pretty major way in qualifying, both on vault and in her floor routine. Even if she couldn't be flawless, 80 or 85% of Simone Biles is better than pretty much anyone else's 100, as evidenced by the fact that despite those mistakes, she finished with the highest overall qualifying score of any gymnast in the field. But here, we come to a pretty key point. Simone definitely wasn't at 80% physically going into these games.
At 24 years old, Simone could become the oldest American woman to win the all-around Olympic gold. You may be competing against a 16-year-old.
Right.
Do you feel intimidated by them at all?
But they have less years than me, so I feel like they're a little bit fresher. They can recover quicker.
In pretty much every interview she gave before these Olympics, Simone talks about her age and how the extra time she spent in the sport compared to her competitors and even her own teammates has affected her body, like this one with Hoda Kotb.
Just describe how you're feeling this time around.
A little bit more tired this time around. I'm a little bit older, so I get tired quicker.
Then in a different interview, Hoda, who is going to get a lot of airtime in this episode, hits her with this gem.
Do you think about your age?
Girl, all the time.
You do? When?
Every day. I'm reminded of my age here. The kids remind me how old I am every day. Yesterday we were in practice and they're like, Simone, how long have you been doing the sport? And I was like, 17 years. And they're like, I'm not even 17 yet. Some of my teammates aren't even 17 yet. And I'm like, thank you. Thank you.
Even though she's still a very young person, relatively speaking, Simone Biles has performed more high-leverage gymnastics than just about anybody ever. At 24, she was entering the 2020 Olympics way past her gymnastics prime, in a sport where the median age is usually below 20. The Tokyo Games were actually the first since 1968 where there were more non-teams competing in gymnastics than teenagers. This is a sport where you have athletes like Dominic Moceanu winning gold medals at the age of 14, or at least you did before they changed the age rules, but Simone Biles had been winning world championships for nearly a decade by the time she went to Tokyo. That is an eternity in the gymnastics world, and in lieu of a Carrie Strug-style broken ankle, you could very easily make the argument that Simone's biggest physical issue at the 2020 Olympics might have just been wear and tear. But that, of course, is not the reason USA Gymnastics gave for her withdrawal. Their statement after the fact said that she'd been scratched from the team competition and the all-around competition to focus on her mental health, which seemed to suggest that whatever physical issues she might have been feeling, the main problem was what was going on between her ears. And they really could not have been more right about that, but it is more than a little ironic that USA Gymnastics, the organization, were the ones communicating Simone's mental health status to the public. Because along with NBC and journalists like our old friend Hoda Kotb, USAG were probably the ones most responsible for messing it up in the first place. Let's talk about marketing for a second. NBC and others paid a whole bunch of money to broadcast the Olympics, and especially after waiting for an entire year and living through the threat of them not happening at all, it makes sense that they would put the country's most marketable athlete right at the center of all their promotional stuff. Here's the BBC's trailer for the 2020 Olympics. Guess what? There's Simone. Here's an NBC ad where they talk about how gravity doesn't apply to her and call her the greatest of all time. NBC Tokyo 2020. She's not the only Simone on the page, but she is the one in the middle. Major broadcasters all over the world knew exactly where to put Simone in their marketing materials, because they knew that by herself, she could get people to watch. Or not watch, which is exactly what happened in the US when people found out she wasn't competing. But that's a lot of hype to put on one person, and that's far from where it stopped. Like, just check out Simone's face when she gets this question from Hoda Kotb.
Are you beatable?
I don't know.
For all the crap she gets about being cocky, Simone gives a very measured answer to that. But Hoda is not having it.
My game, I feel like it would be very hard.
If I had a vote, I would say, no, girl, you are not beatable.
TV networks and the people working for them were putting Simone on a pedestal for months leading up to these games, and even more so once they got postponed. Which is not nothing in the bigger context of this, by the way. Simone had to navigate the hardest moment of her athletic life on the complete other side of the world without basically any of her friends or family allowed to be there. And that is especially hard for a woman who, by her own admission, thrives on the support of the people watching her.
I can't tell you how happy I am for you guys. And to do it in this arena, it was a sellout. They say that it may have been the biggest Olympic trial crowd ever.
Yeah. Wow.
And it felt like being at a concert. Yeah. I mean, it was wild. So when we get to the Olympics, it's not going to be like that. You're not going to have that. Right. Do you think it will affect how you perform, Simone?
Personally, I thrive under pressure, so I'm a little bit worried how it's going to affect me once we get over there. But I heard that we get a little bit of a crowd, so it'll be better.
It'll be something.
Yeah, update, it was most definitely not better. Simone's 2020 Olympics did not go anything like anyone thought they would, least of all her. And that had to feel like a serious gut punch, considering that she just barely wanted to be there in the first place. In a New York Magazine interview a couple of months after the Olympics, Simone straight up said that she should have quit the sport before she got to Tokyo. She didn't really want to go to the games even when it was still in 2020, so when it got bumped back an entire year, those feelings just got even more intense. But if she didn't want to go, I hear you ask, then why did she? She already had 5 medals from Rio, so she didn't have anything left to prove. So why spend all that time killing yourself in training, going through trials, just to do something you're dreading? For the sake of getting it exactly right, I'll just let Simone answer that herself. With some help from Hoda Kotb, of course.
It's about keeping a spotlight on some terrible, unfinished business. The sex abuse scandal perpetrated by former teen doctor Larry Nassar.
I just feel like everything that happened, I had to come back to the sport, to be a voice, to have change happen, because I feel like if there weren't a remaining survivor in the sport, they would have just brushed it to the side. But since I'm still here, they have to do something. So I feel like coming back, gymnastics just wasn't the only purpose I was supposed to do.
When we talk about Simone Biles and her performance at the 2020 Olympics, what we're really talking about is trauma and how people respond to it. Whether it's growing up in foster care, being verbally abused by coaches, or even sexually abused by Larry Nassar, Simone Biles has experienced a lot of trauma in her life. And I know you might be sitting there thinking, well, what does that have to do with being good at sports? And the answer to that is a lot. When someone is experiencing a trauma response caused by, say, participating in the event that was at the center of you and your friends being physically taken advantage of for years at a time, they aren't really themselves. They go into fight or flight mode, which is to say that their higher order brain functions yield the floor to the ones built for dealing with an imminent threat. When a trauma response kicks in, you're not really thinking about performance anymore. You're thinking about survival. That's what I think happened to Simone Biles at the Olympics, and not just because I'm recklessly speculating, but because she pretty much said as much in an interview in 2021.
Over the years, after suppressing so many emotions and putting up a front on a global scene, I think really all of that came to light, and my body and my mind allowed me to suppress all of that stuff for so many years, for as long as it could take. And as soon as we stepped onto the Olympic scene, it's just decided it couldn't do it anymore, and it cracked, and that's what happens.
Simone said coming back to compete in Tokyo was about more than just gymnastics, and it was. In her mind, She had to come back to keep USAG accountable for what they didn't do to stop Larry Nassar and what they could do going forward. That's a lot of pressure for someone to put on themselves, especially considering what others were already expecting from her. But that's the role she felt she could occupy. But in the end, more than gymnastics ended up being more than Simone and her body could handle. But like I said earlier, this is about much more than just this one competition. If Simone Biles came back to Tokyo as the last survivor of Larry Nassar and as the one holding USAG's feet to the fire, then logically, she couldn't keep going in that team final. Fighting through the discomfort she was obviously feeling and ignoring the danger she might be putting herself in would feed right into the culture she was trying to fight back against. Longtime fans of gymnastics will remember Carrie Strug's final vault at the 1996 Olympics. Everybody remembers her coach, Bella Caroli, yelling, "You can do it, Carrie," and then picking her up in his arms once she finished. Great American moment, right? Well, maybe not, given the whole context. They didn't know it yet, but the Russian girl had completely shanked her floor routine, so strictly speaking, Carrie Strug didn't have to do that second vault at all. And that stings a bit when you consider that she never did competitive gymnastics again after that moment, which again, was not necessary. Like, think about if instead of it being a close game, the Bulls had been up by like 30 during Michael Jordan's flu game in the 97 finals, and his coach had just made him play anyway. Like, no, Mike, go get some rest, dude. Drink you some Gatorade and come back for game 6. It'll be fine. But for a long time, that was the culture of USA Gymnastics. Win at all costs, whether it's a couple of ligaments in your ankle or a decades-long pattern of criminal behavior. Say what you will about Simone Biles, but it was brave for her to stick to her mission, and for her teammates to support her in that, because she knew the millions of little girls around the world watching couldn't see her encourage the old system. And let me tell you, the old system is going to take some unpacking of its own. As soon as I started writing this episode, I realized that it was going to be a two-parter, because weirdly, a lot of the nationalism that was swirling around after we didn't win the gold medal felt pretty familiar.
So you know who has the gold medal? Russia. Russia. I have to go look at these 4'11" Russian Olympians chewing on their gold medals, smirking at the Americans. I'm not okay with that. But honestly, that's where we're headed.
Like Charlie Kirk, apparently, USA Gymnastics has never enjoyed losing to the Russians, which is kind of how the old system came to being in the first place. In my opinion, it's impossible to disentangle Simone Biles' stance on coming back for 2021 from the legacy of the Carolis, because even if they've officially been kicked out of USA Gymnastics, their fingerprints are still all over this program. They've certainly been a huge part of Simone Biles' story, especially Marta, and to me, you can't understand why what Simone did was so brave without digging deeper into the culture she was protesting against. So that's what we're going to do next time, but until then, I'll leave you with this. Simone Biles' elite gymnastics career is over, and that's sad. But I think I would argue that her choice to value her own well-being is going to age really well. She may not have wanted to go to Tokyo, and it may not have gone the way she wanted when she got there, but despite all of that, millions of people around the world still watched her do something amazing. Simone Biles went to Tokyo to show them all that gymnastics could be better than what it's been before, and in that, she was remarkably successful. And that is some real GOAT behavior right there. Hi everybody, thanks for watching my video, especially if you're new here. If you are, welcome. I'm Will. I'm kind of the Hoda copy around here, if you understand what I mean. We like to talk about sports psychology and culture on this channel, and on both of those topics, there really isn't much better of a subject than Simone Biles. If you enjoyed the content, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more stuff like it. We put out new videos every week, and although we tend to hop around from sport to sport pretty regularly, we're going to be sticking with Olympic gymnastics for this upcoming week. Because this story is probably the most complicated of any of the ones we've done so far, and I'm going to give it as long as it takes to tell it well. Until then, though, that's all we've got. See you next time.